are there, right? So that is basically what Infra Spotlight does. All right. And also, in case you didn't know, this event is a pre-launch event for our SeraNova platform, which means that alongside the theme of the event, we'll also be sharing insights, on the platform. But before we go ahead and dive into the core of this meeting, I'm just going to share a few housekeeping rules to make sure that we, get the best of this event today. So the first is to make sure that your mics are muted, right, to avoid background noise and distractions when you are not speaking, right? You can unmute yourself when it's time to speak or participate in, discussions. If you can, please let's try to keep our cameras on to facilitate an interactive atmosphere, right? We also encourage that you use the chat function for questions. If you'd rather not, ask your questions vocally, right? Please do well to type it in the chat box. And please let's raise our hands when we have to speak, right? To also avoid distractions and the likes. And finally, and I think most importantly, is that we should maintain a respectful atmosphere, respectful interactions when we are interacting with one another, with the speakers and everyone on here. Right, with that said, I welcome everybody once again. Just to, break the ice, if you can, kindly just put it in the chat box where you are joining in from, why you are joining, what you want to achieve, what you plan to, gain from this meeting. Let's get to know each other better. All right, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to hand over to Toby now to take the opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oluwatowoju. My name is Toby. Good morning, everyone. Our distinguished guests, our partners. It's a great pleasure that I welcome you to this wonderful gathering. But first, I want to say a very big well done to the Solar and our team for putting together this event, which I see as a very important platform for discussing the transformative role of infrastructure in achieving sustainable development. And this event is not just one of several meetings. I see it as a convergence of minds where ideas and solutions that are aimed at addressing one of the most critical enablers of economic growth and social equity, which I'll call infrastructure development. And as we all know, infrastructure lies at the heart of our national progress. It shapes the connectivity of our societies, the accessibilities of opportunities, and the competitiveness of our economies. And so today we are not just here to just while away time, but I see there's an opportunity for us to explore a very important theme, which is strategic infrastructure development for national competitiveness. And to me, this theme underscores the very urgent need for deliberate, inclusive, and transformative infrastructure strategies, not only address the current gaps that we see, but also anticipate the future needs. And as individuals and everyone on this call, we are tasked with coming up with ideas, creating that blueprint for the infrastructure that will support industrial growth, that will support social mobility and environmental stability for generations to come. And so now, as we go deeper into the conversation, it is my very distinct honor to introduce someone who is a leader who has been at the forefront of driving economic policy, driving governance, and driving reform in Nigeria. You see, there's some people that you see from afar, like, nah, this person is a great inspiration. And guys, trust me, Dr. Tayo Adeloju, who is the CEO of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, NESG, like we know it to be, is one of such person. And is not just a visionary leader, but I see him as a trusted voice in shaping the Nigerian growth narrative. And under his leadership, the Nigeria Economic Summit Group has consistently championed bold initiatives that align national development with infrastructural priorities, ensuring that the country remains competitive in every global economy. And I'll just say this, back then when Busola became a fellow, Busola and someone called Gordon, I was very jealous of them because I saw the NSG as a platform that help young people to get into such important conversations around economic development in Nigeria. And guys, Dr. Tayo brings a very strong word of experience when it comes to governance, when it comes to public policy and economic transformation. And his work has influenced countless reforms. He has driven impactful dialogue, which is one of them we're going to benefit from today, between the public and the private sectors for us to be able to achieve tangible outcomes. In his keynote address, which we'll listen to very shortly, Dr. Tayo will delve into the theme. And I believe that his insights will highlight how we can align policy framework with critical infrastructure needs, unlock investment, and ensure that the infrastructure serves as the foundation for inclusive and sustainable development. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor that we have such great opportunity to hear from a leader who embodies the vision and action required to propel our nation forward. And so please join me in giving a very warm virtual applause to Dr. Tayo as he takes the stage to inspire and guide us in this critical conversation. Happy to have you with us, Dr. Tayo. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Toby. It's a pleasure to be here, and Happy New Year to everyone. Congratulations to Infra Spotlight for the launch. And thank you for having me. And, you know, when I saw the topic, I was wondering what on earth will I deliver in 15 minutes. So I said to someone that I could speak about this topic from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And not repeat myself, just because of the breadth of the topic, the importance of the topic. And what I'm excited is that the platform is convening the younger generation to reflect on something that, in my opinion, the older generation has failed at, right? And we now have an opportunity to do it different. So because of the ground I want to cover, this will be like rapid fire. You're going to have the slides. So this is going to be like rapid fire through my presentation. Yeah, and then we can have questions at the end. So the big idea is I'm supposed to prosecute the strategic importance of infrastructure in national development planning. And the place to start is to say, look, the way you think about the ideas and the philosophy behind how you plan a country matters way more, way more than infrastructure itself. How we think about the ideas behind how we plan countries matter. And you know, when you look at Nigeria, Nigeria's planning system comes from some other influences. We have a melting pot of ideas. You know, we were influenced heavily by the UK, some incremental input from the UK system. The OECD influenced our modeling on country practices. In the 90s, NESG pushed the government to begin to look at Asian influences, you know, so Malaysian Vision 2020, you know, India Vision 2050, China Vision 2049, were things that the NESG forced Nigeria to begin to look at, to be inspired by in the early 90s. And there are other multilateral influences on our planning system in Nigeria. So, of course, we're heavily influenced by the UK system, which has this national, regional, local type planning. And because Nigeria was a big leader in regional integration, ECOWAS plans impact Nigerian plans, African Union plans impact Nigerian plans. In the current planning process, the AU 2063 plans heavily impact how Nigeria's plans were developed. Another big influence on our planning process is the OECD model, which is very centralized, which is a centralized national planning and decentralized deployment. We apply this planning model in designing the Vision 2010 in 1995. Of course, like I said, we're heavily influenced by the Malaysian model, the Vision 2010, Vision 2020, ERGP, were all heavily influenced by the Malaysian model. And the Malaysian model has centralized planning control at federal, and then has decentralized deployment of the plan at state, government, private sector, with a central coordination unit driving it. So, like I said, we were heavily influenced by this approach. A national long-term plan broken to a 5-year plan. That plan is then cascaded from level 1 to level 2 to create regional and state plans, and the state plans are cascaded to create local government plan. This is important to just understand how Nigeria started to think about how it plans its own plans. So currently today, the Nigerian plans have a model, right? At the top is that the plans are authorized by the federal government of Nigeria and the National Economic Council. Those authorizations then activate committees that start the planning process. The plans are then represented to the National Planning Council, which is made up of all the commissioners of planning, once the governors sign off on the broad framework. And then, of course, it's then cascaded to state and local governments. The planning process itself requires collecting proposals from National Assembly, public sector, private sector, civil society, etc. And those, what we call circulars and proposals, feed through an intergovernmental consultative process, the planning, design, and development. And what you call infrastructure planning happens somewhere between the National Development Planning Committee, the National Planning Council, and the states. This is where sectoral planning happens, and infrastructure planning in particular happens. So, for example, the current model that we have run in Nigeria is a Vision 2050 vision for Nigeria. There is a 2030 agenda and the short-term plan 2021 to 2025. So that's kind of what has created the basis of where infrastructure sits in our planning process. So from the left to the right, you have the vision for Nigeria. That vision defines the National Development Plan. The National Development Plan then informs infrastructure subsector master plans and infrastructure subsector reforms. And that kind of is what forms the basis of the planning process. In practical terms, you have an Agenda 2050. If you've not seen the document, there's actually a document like that. It's a real document. And that document says where Nigeria infrastructure will be in 2050. Then there is a National Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan, which tells you what the infrastructure plan that will get us to 2050 looks like, right? And then that plan is cascaded into a medium-term plan. We're currently running the National Development Plan 2021 to 2025, and some of you on this call were part of writing this plan. And so you can remember this plan, sections of the plan that kept you up at night. Now, in the medium-term development plan, you take the infrastructure section of the medium-term development plan, basically pulls the longer-term infrastructure plan into the medium-term plan. So there's some clear plans for the medium term for 5 years. And those 5-year plans are then executed based on a medium-term expenditure framework. In other words, the government budgets to spend money and provide an investment framework for the private sector to invest in infrastructure to deliver the infrastructure stock for the period, okay? But here's the truth. The truth is this doesn't go as it sounds. For most of Nigeria's growth, our long-term plans tend to be linked when it comes to actual execution from the infrastructure plans that have been implemented in the medium term. And this is because of politics. We have a 4-year electoral cycle. So no matter what we're doing with the medium-term development plan 2021-2025, President Tinubu came into office in 2023 with his 8 priorities, and those 8 priorities revised, were used almost to revise what the medium-term development plan were. Now that causes, whenever this happens every 4-year cycle or electoral process, it derails the plan a bit. So this is one of the big imperatives of rethinking the strategic importance of infrastructure in planning, is how do we protect infrastructure planning from the risks of the political cycle, right? So if you remember, we went from 7-point agenda under President Yaradua, to transformation agenda under Jonathan, to change agenda under Buhari. Then Buhari shifted from change to recovery with the economic growth and growth plan, and now we are at renewed hope, right? And sometimes when these medium-term agendas are delinked, it creates problems. Now, when you look at countries that Nigeria should benchmark in terms of the strategic importance of infrastructure as connected to national planning, historically, we've gone to the BRICS nations. BRICS, because these are middle power countries that look like Nigeria in terms of where we are coming from, but have done stuff differently. And basically what the data tells us is that cumulative infrastructure development index of the BRICS countries follows a certain logic. One, it correlates with resource consumption, but also it correlates with growth. If you really want to drive national development and economic growth, infrastructure is a key driver, period. And so when you look at the investment in infrastructure development, the cumulative infrastructure development index, and you look at the projected, the past economic performance and GDP, what you see is that there is a direct correlation between infrastructure development index and how the nations perform. Okay, you cannot fire above you cannot fire your growth above your infrastructure development index. And what we see is that the nations that are performing better, China, India, have a more disciplined long-term planning philosophy that is unbroken, whether or not governments change, regimes change. So they've insulated the infrastructure development planning process from the cyclic reset of short political cycles. And so when you look at our peers, China, India, where we should be commensurate to them in 2050, and you look at how China, for example, is planning in the BRICS, what you see is a deliberate long-term planning discipline that Nigeria has not been able to achieve yet. And this is a big part of thinking about the strategic importance. So China has run 2 50-year plans. Actually, it's a 100-year plan, 50-50. It just finished its first 50-year plan and is now running the second part of the 100-year plan. You can imagine the discipline of an unbroken 100-year plan run by different leaders, but the discipline of just keeping at it, right? That's the kind of mindset and economic planning philosophy required. But to do that, we need to change our institutions, insulate the planning institutions from the risk of political weaponization and arbitrariness to truly make progress with that. Now, let's jump to Nigeria. Nigeria is expected to grow exponentially to 410 million people, and this is going to mount huge pressure on infrastructure, social amenities, etc. So the imperatives of building infrastructure at scale at an accelerated rate requires no defense. There is no way forward without building infrastructure at a pace that matches our first, the size of our population, the youthfulness of our population. So imagine you're going to have, 400 million people, many of them in the cities. Imagine the burden of that on a city like Lagos. So if you take 400 million people and you just say to yourself that, anyhow, a good 25% of them will aim for your biggest city, right? Just imagine how the Lagos infrastructure, Port Harcourt infrastructure will collapse under the scale of this type of population boom if we do not build infrastructure at par. And currently, Nigeria is not building infrastructure at par. And so you're going to have huge pressure because of rapid urbanization, etc. And that requires something to think about. But something else to think about is that you also need a very skilled workforce to accelerate the building of modern infrastructure as quickly as possible. So when we say infrastructure development and planning for it, it's not just planning for the money, it's planning for the skills to build infrastructure. And without world-class infrastructure, our optimistic scenario for Nigeria, which is to become a double-digit growth economy, hit 1 trillion by 2030, and cross the 4 trillion mark by 2040, is simply impossible, right? If you're not scaling infrastructure, and so because of that, one of the binding constraints to growth, to transformative growth, is poor infrastructure itself, right? And it's simply not possible to grow at that rate without really thinking about what we need to do. So we did a benchmark on the base case, what Nigeria is doing currently, right? Where, we just do incremental improvement of roads, no big seaport transformation, no big, we are implementing less than 15% of the real master plan. Gas infrastructure stays where it is at 10% of the gas infrastructure plan. We don't exceed 6,000 megawatts. This is a recipe for failure, right? That is what we're doing right now. Base case is what we're running. What Nigeria needs to run, right, is we need to run the optimistic case where basically we build a best in Africa class infrastructure stock, right? This allows us to automatically shift into our pair class, which is mint and brick pairs, right? And it has to be driven because the size of the investment is so huge, has to be driven by privatization and concessions. It has to be efficient privatization, which allows us to deliver almost 250,000 kilometers of paved roads, 70% greenfield projects. Port quality needs to rise, above 7.0% in terms of efficiency levels. A stronger energy mix, 45,000 megawatts of power, and new connections at a scale, where we truly are demonstrating our capacity. And then we need to cover Nigeria with 75% gas infrastructure. So you have more gas positive regions, et cetera, and then close the housing gap. Now, this is not possible with the current financing model, right? So when you think of the future of infrastructure, what does it look like, right? Now, the future of infrastructure is just based on the plans we have, right? We need to spend, on power to just shift power from where it is to where we need it to be, right? Power alone will gulp, almost $80 billion. And this comes from the infrastructure master plan, by the way. We're not coughing these numbers out of our head. This is just the real cost of delivering infrastructure. And gas infrastructure that needs to scale. I mean, we've seen just what Alhaji Aliko Dangote has put in one refinery in Nigeria. It's almost in excess of $7-8 billion, just one. So you can imagine what it takes to build 3 more, transform several. But this is possible, right? We can see with the Dangote experience that it's possible, but you need to bring more private capital into the room. Same with road transportation, same with, so if you look at the master plan, if you deliver the master plan, you're discussing 10-lane highways, that are built in such a way that they are packed. So you basically you basically hack Nigeria in terms of super corridors, right? And those super corridors allows you to drive transformative change. These corridors are different because they're carrying oil, gas, electricity cables, telecommunication cables. You know, the Minister of Digital Economy has been discussing delivering 10,000 kilometers of optic fiber. Just imagine we can do the 10,000 kilometers of optic fiber on top corridors that are 90,000 kilometers of optic fiber on 90,000 kilometers of high corridor 10-lane roads. What that can possibly look like. And you know, same thing with maritime deep sea ports of a completely different class type. So imagine that you could dredge the lower Niger and drop all your goods in Lokoja today, how it transforms your road networks, etc. So this is possible. This is the plan. And, you know, high bandwidth corridors allows us to deliver, you know, Dubai scale cities that don't just sit in Lagos or your Port Harcourt. Imagine the transformation of Aba, or Onitsha, you know, as the case may be. Big question is, how do you finance it, right? When we modeled for Vision 2050 a couple of years ago, the gap in financing was about 2.4 trillion, plus or minus adjustments of cost, FX, you know, inflation, etc. We might be looking now in excess of a $4 trillion investment in infrastructure to move our infrastructure stock from where it is to, like I said, best in African class and compared to the mint and bricks nations. But to do that, something needs to change in how we think about money, right? Capital importation has to be of a scale where we are discussing somewhere between, you know, 35 to 40, 50 billion dollars in investments. And this requires that we repackage infrastructure differently, and we shift from this fiscal allocation underperforming PPP delivery models, which is the base case where we are today, and we move to, you know, improving infrastructure governance capabilities, transforming government infrastructure finance to include huge equity contribution to infrastructure funding mix, shift from to an investment-led model on infrastructure projects where packaging is done so that it's globally competitive, well-priced, efficient, and attracts global money, right? And basically accelerate critical infrastructure development legislation that has been in the National Assembly forever. Look, the ports were concessioned almost 2 decades ago, you know, actually going on 3 decades ago. And the Ports and Harbour Law that should back port concession, it is still in the National Assembly as a bill almost 25 years later. You know, you can't do that and be a big attractor of, you know, big FDI into investment. So let me close by talking about rethinking finance. Most of the financing as government thinks about infrastructure stock in Nigeria, and by the way, because government controls most of the infrastructure stock, it needs to de-risk and deregulate infrastructure sector, rail, seaports, airports, gas, you know, to be transformative. And housing is a great case, right? Where government can de-risk housing. So if you look at the current size of housing in terms of GDP, you know, construction value chain in 2018 puts the size of housing demand, right, at 4.17 trillion, just using sector accounting calculations for housing GDP. Then if you look at rental GDP, as of 2018, it puts it about 5.0 trillion, right? Which means, you know, if you combine both, the total demand, you have a 9 trillion demand in housing construction value chains. And if you want to transform this overnight and meet that 9 trillion demand, right, you need to transform finance. And you need to transform finance across the value chain. And so one of the big ideas that NES is hoping to push, not just in housing, but across infrastructure, is the need to almost hack finance. New national financial architectures that allow you to rethink, housing production, estate production, land production, etc., tenant production, and you need to radically rearrange financing products to make this happen. And it's everything: rethinking land finance, title finance, bulk infrastructure finance, housing, sales, maintenance, improvement, and bring all of that together. For this to happen, the experts at this is private sector, so you need to clear the road, de-risk infrastructure in real ways, and mandate institutions, pension funds, non-banking financial institutions, CRG institutions to do more by creating policies that recapitalize them at scale to finance housing, different for finance ports, finance rail, as the case may be. And this is possible. We're seeing other middle power countries in the Mint and the BRICS bloc do this, with immense efficiencies and execution. But the key to getting this done is you must depoliticize the infrastructure packaging process and infrastructure stock of the country. So back to my initial idea, and I close. Infrastructure is strategically important to national planning. In fact, it's embedded in the very idea that if you want to grow a nation, your vision for the nation must visualize world-class infrastructure at the beginning, and you must execute it and ensure all the infrastructure subsectors have well-aligned master plans that are de-risked from the political process and allows us to build the infrastructure and the country of our dreams. Let me stop here. Thank you for your attention. And we can, jump into questions if there are any, or I think it's a panel. I'm not sure what's next. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sayes. I was not wrong when I said all that I said. Thank you so much for such a discourse. And there was no better person to have given this keynote address than yourself, because you have all the resources to be able to share with us, and we really appreciate you for that. So thank you so much. So it's time for questions. Does anyone have question? Please use the raising of the hand button to indicate that you have questions. While you do that, please allow me pass over to the one I call the amazing Oluwabusola to please take over. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And just before we move on, we have Temitope's hand raised, and I think there's also one question in the chat from Daniel Adewi, which is, it says you have established a foundational problem that has become cyclic, that is change in electoral administration impending the national long-term plan in one way, shape, or form. As a country, why have we not developed that plan that is insulated from administrative changes?
So, like anything in development, you have to fight for it, right? We need to remember that infrastructure, as we have built it, was given to us by colonial masters, right? The original infrastructure plans of Nigeria favored an extractive behavior, right? Where we took things, infrastructure took us to the primary production centers, you took our natural resource, and it took you to the seaport and exported it out of your country. Now, when you want to rebuild your national infrastructure for your own competitiveness, right? You must be dogged about it, because nobody from outside the country is going to help you become more competitive than them, right? It's the people that must say, no, this is good for us. It's important that gas reaches Aba. It's important that gas reaches, the major consumers of power. So then that becomes imperative for gas infrastructure to move faster, right? And so citizens go from simply asking for, stomach infrastructure to asking for real stuff. If smallholder farmer groups know that the Lakaji corridor, which connects Lagos to Kano, right, allows them to be almost 500% more efficient and brings down the cost of logistics almost, you know, to a small fraction of the current cost, right? With less disruption caused by, you know, roadblocks and, you know, unauthorized tax collectors between Kano and Lagos. They should be the ones making it a demand for presidential candidates, right? They should say, you know, so I think that citizens need to become more educated about this thing so that they put on the table that we insist you will follow the infrastructure plan. You cannot derail the plan, you know, and go do something else. If the political demand is coming from the electorate, the politicians will pay attention. You know, for too long, you know, they just do what they think, you know, a few nice schools, you know, and things here and there. So I think that expand the citizen and political demand for studying the plans in terms of their consistency. Let's go to the National Assembly and pass a national planning legislation that constrains the arbitrariness of politicians in the cyclic political cycles that are disruptive. And then we can go from there.
Thank you very much. And I would ask Temitope to please share their question. And this would be our final question for this session, so we can move ahead. Temitope, you have the floor.
All right. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I have two questions. You spoke about China, India, and the implementation of their infrastructure development plan. So my question is there a link between a country's system of government and the implementation of its development agenda? That's number one. Number two, due to our system of government where we have elections every 4 years and we have frequent change of government, how then can we make it compulsory for our politicians to follow the laid down development plan? Thank you, sir.
Dr. Tayo, you're mute.
Thanks, Tokwe. That's a great question. Sorry about that. National development is premised on 3 dimensions of development, right? One is economic, 2 is political, 3 is social, and these 3 depend on the fertilization of what we call knowledge development. Now, to execute long-term plans, you basically need state capacity. You need stronger political institutions, right? China, if China says it's going to build a road, you know, from, you know, commensurate distance from Lagos, right? A brand new road cutting through states and communities from Lagos to, let's say, Sokoto, okay? And they want to do it in 12 months. And they need to relocate 5 million people and resettle them. The Chinese state has the state capacity, 1, to plan that project. 2, to raise the finance for that project. 3, to engage the social structures at regional, provincial, municipal, and local to mobilize people to move, right? 4, has the efficiency to transmit to the people the compensations required for them to move without fraud, without 1 kobo missing. And then the competencies of their ministries, departments, and agencies to then project manage and execute that project on time and within budget. Okay? And this is what you need for infrastructure. Infrastructure is delivered by institutions that can run projects. You know, the Dubai UAE ambassador to Nigeria was saying to me that one of the competencies of UAE is when it comes to infrastructure project management, they have become, they've become, what do you call it? They've become unrivaled in their capacity to design, finance, deliver on time and within budget. So you need to build the state capacity for that. Nigeria has not shown that it has the state capacity for the efficient delivery of infrastructure projects as a government. Whenever infrastructure projects are delivered on time and within budget, the history of infrastructure development has shown that it was because we handed it over to the private sector, we depoliticized the process, we deregulated the environment, we de-risked the opportunities, and so the private sector could execute. And a very good example is between 2003 and 2013, Nigeria deployed almost 17,000 kilometers of optical fiber backbone from zero, right? Most of NITEL's digital infrastructure backbone was uncommissioned. And how did we do it? We licensed the private sector to do it. We facilitated the private sector getting right of way for long haul digital, vertical, and horizontal telecommunication infrastructure. We provided the guarantees that allow the private sector to raise money, not from government, but from their own sources, equity finance, debt financing. We capitalized our banking sector to be able to bank the telecommunication sector. The regulator kept clearing the road and holding the operators accountable to meet their targets. And the outcome was a GSM revolution. It can be done, has been done by us in Nigeria. We can do it again across other sectors.
Well, thank you very much, sir. This has been a very thought-provoking address, and we are very confident that our audience have gained so much insight and, start to think about what the future of infrastructure in Nigeria should look like. Thank you so much, sir. I would now move on to the next segment of this event. And in this segment of this event, we will be talking about how we can harness technology for policy awareness. In this segment, I'll be sharing more about what we've been doing at InfraSpotlight. For those who are here and you don't know what we do, we are a non-profit organization raising awareness about infrastructure development in Nigeria and the rest of Africa. And our theory of change is that awareness is the starting point for meaningful advocacy, change, and sustainable impact. And it has been said multiple times that awareness is closely tied to access to information or accessibility of information. So to advocate for better policies, people need to be aware, people need to be informed, citizens need to have the information to be able to hold their government accountable. What has the government committed to doing? How far has the government implemented this policy? Like Dr. Tayo rightly said, there is a document called the Nigeria Vision 2050. I wonder if many people on this call have seen that document. There is also the current medium-term national development plan. I know a few of us on this call, myself, Godwin is on this call. I saw Godwin earlier, and Chinazam, we worked as technical assistant as part of the Bridge Fellowship with the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. So we are familiar with these plans and with these documents. And I know that some of us here who work in the civic space, like Victoria, like Dolapo, would probably be familiar with these things. But it is not really about those of us who work in the civic space. It's for everybody. Citizens need to be aware in order to hold their government accountable and also to help monitor the timelines of different policies from formulation down to its implementation. And so to advocate for better policies, people need to be aware. And almost every day, policies are made that shape the lives and livelihoods of citizens. The big question is, how often are citizens informed about this policy development? We cannot have an engaged or active citizenry or participatory public policy process if citizens are unaware about the policies made by their own government. And we strongly believe at InfraSpotlight that technology can be a powerful tool for increasing policy awareness, that technology can be a powerful tool for advocacy. For instance, you can have interactive dashboards by the government or by civil society organizations to provide information about policy updates to citizens. We can also have SMS and mobile technology to provide updates to citizens directly to their mobile phone. And we can also integrate AI in the form of chatbots to answer questions that citizens might have regarding various policies in their countries. So at Infra Spotlight, we built SeraNova. I'm going to share my screen, and I would like to just let you know that this is the very first time we are sharing SeraNova publicly. So if you're on this call, you are the very first set of people to see what SeraNova looks like. I mean, apart from those of us who are working on the team and I've seen it. And SeraNova was built in partnership with Learn Politics. So I'm going to be sharing my screen to just show us what SeraNova looks like. Pardon me while I get around the tech. Please confirm that you can see my screen. Amazing. So this is SeraNova. And SeraNova, as I said earlier, was built in partnership with Learn Politics to house infrastructure-related policies in Africa. So SeraNova is an online repository. Think of it as a bank that would house or that houses every single infrastructure policy in Africa. And it is not just housing these policies. So it's not just a platform where you go onto to just see the policies only. The policies have been summarized to give you access to the most relevant information about the different policies. So you have a quick overview of each policy. We've also included commentaries to help you understand what does this policy mean. We've also included relevant information about the timeline of the policy, the dates that the policies were introduced and how long they would last. But the most important thing also is that we have also provided key information about the different reforms that the government of these countries have committed to doing across various infrastructure subsectors. So so we started building SeraNova about a year ago in April 2024. And it's taken so many months to research, to analyze, and ensure that the platform is very user-friendly. So anyone can access SeraNova via any device at all, provided you have a browser on your device, you would be able to access SeraNova. And I'm very proud to mention to us that we covered 28 countries in Africa. That is more than half of Africa, 50% of the entire continent, which is a very proud achievement for us that we were able to get this done in the space that we had. And I'm going to just, as I begin to wrap up this segment of this program, I'm going to ask us a question. If you were listening very carefully to Dr. Tayo's keynote address, you probably already know the answer. But the question is, how many people here know if Nigeria has a policy regarding infrastructure? And how many people here know the name of that policy? If you know the name of the policy, do you know when this policy was formulated, or do you know the timeline for the execution of this policy? You see, you might not have an answer to this right now, but SeraNova does. SeraNova already has the answer to that question or those questions. So all you need to do is go on SeraNova. And I'm going to show you. When you go on our website, on the platform, you would see this dashboard. But when you click on policy repository, you would be able to see every country in Africa that we have already covered. And so if you're looking for information about Nigeria, as I assume that many of us here are Nigerians, all you need to do is click on Nigeria, and it would provide you with the information about the policy. So Nigeria currently has a specialized policy for infrastructure, and it's called the National Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan, which continues to 2043 and is a part of the 2050 agenda for Nigeria. You would see all the relevant information, the objectives, and also you would see that every reform that is supposed to be undertaken under that policy, you can see them according to the various infrastructure subsector, from transportation to energy, to ICT, to water, to water, to housing, to social infrastructure. It is all there for you to use. So we have a request from everyone here on the call. We are launching this this important tool officially in a week's time. So on the 31st of January, this platform will be live and publicly accessible. So it's going to be live. So we want you to please visit SeraNova. We want you to please go on it to see, learn, gain insight from it. But not just visit. We want you to tell your networks. We want you to tell your community that we've built something very important, that we want you to also have information about infrastructure. Remember, as I said at the beginning, the awareness is the starting point for meaningful advocacy. You can't advocate if you don't know. So with that, I'd like to close and hand over to Victoria Oladipo for the panel session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Salami, and well done on Infra Spotlight SeraNova. Thank you, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. To SeraNova a lot. And last year, I partnered with Infra Spotlight to build, and how it is very necessary for us to also have a repository for infrastructure policies in Africa. So I'm going to be moderating the panel, Agbe and Abiola Tindurodola. Yeah, I'm very excited to actually moderate this session also, because Dolapo Agbede, I've had her speak a lot of times, and I am so excited for her to share the insights that she is going to share with us based on our work with persons with disabilities, and also Abiola based on his work with urban planning and sustainable cities. So welcome, Dolapo, welcome, Abiola. I don't know if we can spotlight both of them too. Okay, Ma, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Hello,
you.
everyone. Glad to be here.
Hello, Abiola, welcome. Can you hear me too?
You're muted, Abiola.
Okay, yeah. Hello everyone. Good morning. It's really nice to be here. So, yeah, I'm honored to be part of this amazing conversation.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And I'm going to be asking you questions based on your experiences and based on your expertise in this space. And so my very first question would go to Abiola. And the question is that, what do you think is the role of citizens in participating in infrastructure development? Because most times we think about how infrastructure is, and we think it's only the work of the government. And like Dr. Otayo shared, like a lot of things have gone into creating documents, plans, policies for infrastructure in Nigeria. And this is going to be Africa at large too. But what do you think is the role of citizens in infrastructure development in Africa?
Okay, so thank you, Victoria. So basically, citizens have huge role to play when it comes to infrastructure development, and we've seen this time and time with how so many organizations, even multilateral organizations, actually focusing their attention on making sure that citizens are well informed in and on what the government is planning with regards to infrastructure. So over time, what we have seen is tokenism and placation. So it's more like government trying to be like, let's call them, let's tell them what we want to do, and that's all. But citizens' participation goes beyond that. It's involved having to take people higher the participation ladder, co-producing with them. So if you co-produce with citizens, that's when you are able to get like inclusive outcome. And we've seen these so many times with new initiatives and new ideas are actually coming on board. So more recently, I currently work with a youth group called the Commonwealth Youth for Sustainable Urbanization. And one of the core focus, one of the focal area of our project is how can we get young people and citizens to get on board in designing policy papers and ideas that will eventually address most of the problems that we are currently facing in our cities, and more importantly, how this problem can be inclusive. So one of the things we found out is that we need to go beyond tokenism. We need to go beyond these perfunctory functions of government, just trying to call people together to get them on the table. No, you have to co-produce with them. You have to engage with them, and you have to make sure that these voices that they have are being made use when it comes to infrastructure development. And examples of this abound so well across Africa more recently, especially around housing and urban infrastructure development. So we have the Muungano Alliance in Kenya more recently. So it revolves around urban social movement. So citizens coming together to form an urban reform coalition when government was trying to send them out of their shacks and slums area to provide new infrastructure. So government was planning to provide road infrastructure in that community, and citizens have to come together, design their project, design their idea, and table their needs to the government. And it allows a very good example of citizens' participation in infrastructure development. At the end of the day, conflicting interests were put on the table, and then table were shifted at the end of the day. To some extent, everybody had to come together to agree to a modified plan. So when you look at citizens also having a say beyond just presenting idea to them, like we have, bring them to town hall meetings and talk to them. No, we need to have a way where citizens also have their voice and they are able to put that to work when it comes to infrastructure development.
Thank you very much, Abiola, for what you shared. And just to refer back to the keynote speech of Dr. Tayo and how we explained that even if the electorate are working, these people can actually deliver a lot and more if the electorate also contributes to the kind of development that we want. So instead of us looking at the fact that, oh, this is just a government job, we can think of it in the sense that we can also like demand for better infrastructure. We can also work with the government in producing the kind of infrastructure we have. So I'll be asking Dolapo this question right now. And based on your work with persons with disabilities, a lot of we have a problem of accessibility in different forms of infrastructure, not just in Nigeria, right? But based on how Nigeria infrastructure the Nigeria infrastructure is now, what do you think inclusive and accessible infrastructure will look like for Nigerians?
Thank you for having me, and great answers, Viola, already. So I think we need to first even start from the fact that persons with disabilities are citizens too. And the in fact, what needs to just be done is that at the point of planning, we advocate to plan for everybody. Yes, I will come to the specific needs, accessibility needs of my community of persons with disabilities. And for those who do not know, I identify as a blind woman myself. Okay, so you can just, I'd like to paint a picture and I'd like to spotlight a bit this new policy shift that is looking at and empowering more our local government areas. And I like all of us on the call to just visualize where we live right now. Visualize our environment. Think of that location through a radius of the local government that you currently reside in, and imagine what it would look like if every space across that, common areas, the public use areas, common areas for all residents and citizens within that local government. Imagine what it would look like if it was accessible for all. Because sometimes when we put a focus on accessibility for citizens with disability, it looks like we're trying to create something separate and very special. But rather, I would say the same ramps that are safe, secure, accessible at the right gradients and with the right traction in the right directions for entry and for crossing across streets, for entry into common use spaces. Those ramps and access for any wheeled user, in the case of disability, a wheelchair user, is exactly the same thing that a mother with a young child who is using a hand stroller or a buggy or a carriage would use. I hope we see in both cases, whether it's the wheelchair or it's the buggy that someone is using to more easily move around a child through safe spaces, in the end, we have these two wheeled human carriers, right? And imagine if visualize your local government area, or even visualize the street you're on and maybe a radius of 3 streets around. Imagine if all of us are trying to move around safely on these public spaces. Does it work right now? Most likely the answer will be no. But can you visualize what it would be like if it worked? And then so you see this balance between having accessible spaces and then also fit for purpose for other impairment categories. Because, for example, as a blind person, if I chose to move alone without a physical person with me, and there were tactile points along the pathways that I frequently use, it will give me information about the area I'm in. Nigeria is not there yet. What we are really, really looking forward to as more will come down to the local government areas is to make sure that the engagements that will ensure that universal builds for both access and safety for all, because we need to make them multi-user spaces anyway. Signage is useful to all of us. Smooth, safe gradients so that it's a proper ramp and not a catapult that when you are coming down an incline, just the motion of the combination of gravity and the gradient accelerates your movement in a way that is not safe. Can the texture and the surfaces have the right kind of traction that if it's open space, whether it's wet or dry, you can move safely? So having a more universal use components to all spaces will generally serve us better. This is for public spaces. I also like to also speak to like homes, whether we like it or not. Yes, there's a spotlight on public spaces like the malls, schools being a bit more accessible. Homes too. We actually have persons with disabilities who, as they go into the labor force and they earn, they want to have their own homes too. They want to rent. Well, when you build for purpose, but they want to rent. Also, can we make sure that there are always options for accessible, and it doesn't have to be on the ground floor. And we could have nice ramped inclines. And as I pause at this point, I'd like to mention a certain public building that really, really inspired me. That's before there was a fire incident there. It's the Igoshere High Court, somewhere on Lagos Island. I had a reason to be there for some court proceedings at a time, and it was really interesting to see that this court, beyond the stairs and the elevator to the side of the building, it was ramped up to the top. And that ramped area is also the emergency exit of that location. I thought it was brilliant. And it just shows that if we put our minds to it, quite a bit can be done. But let's keep it for multi-use. That way we can cater for everyone. Victoria.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, ma'am. I think like I totally agree with you. It's not even like I think I totally agree with you because some of the things I've regular user also is how bridges are built. You can see a ramp on one side and a staircase on the other side. And think about it, there's a particular I and my friend, just a pedestrian bridge of risk, I think in Ojota, the way the bridge was built, and I'm like, they said this bridge was supposed to be accessible for persons with disabilities. And even me that do not have a disability, like I cannot even go through that bridge, right? And sometimes we see that a lot of citizens will rather cross the roads that even use the bridges. And you wonder why, because sometimes if you climb the bridges, especially in Lagos, that it's actually more accessible for adults with disabilities. Imagine persons with disabilities, example, to lead to the question beyond right now, because we see a lot of the time that, oh, we are building roads and internet, what infrastructure that we, what will be your solutions for sustainable infrastructure in Nigeria and Africa at large? And why am I asking this question? I a lot of times we see that the government built a bridge and in less than 10 years, the bridge is collapsing, people are dying, or they build a road in less than 10 years, you see that the roads dilapidated, they are not even good at all, they are not motorable anymore. And then there's so much patching, interlocking. They could have tried it before and then they decide to interlock it when there's just so much that they are doing. So what would you recommend for sustainable infrastructure, not just in road infrastructure? I'm also thinking beyond road. I'm thinking like internet infrastructure. I'm also thinking about energy, that's the oil and gas sector. I'm also thinking about power. How can we make this sustainable for Nigerians, and how can the government also make it sustainable for us? Thank you.
All right. So for me, basically, so when we talk about sustainable development or sustainability in its broader sense, it's more like we are talking about a development that meets the needs of the present, right? Without jeopardizing the need of the future. So we are trying to make sure that we address everything together by projecting either materially, socially, physically, trying to look at how all of these things don't jeopardize how when we meet the need of the present without jeopardizing the need of the future. And incredible examples also abound, several countries of this world, and even BRICS nations that are similar to what we are currently as a country. And as Dr. Tayo Aderoju, he puts it out succinctly during his presentation, something I really, really enjoyed was when he talked about infrastructure is delivered by institutions that can run projects. So it's not a one-man thing. So it has to be, there has to be an interconnection. So there is this coordination that need to come in, either horizontally or vertically. So you talk about municipal government embracing some of these things. You talk about the state capacity, who are the institutions that are running these, and who are those that are putting them on check. So in Nigeria, we have the Federal Road Emergency, FEMA, FEMA that organizes road construction and monitors it for federal level. And we have all these state level institutions as well. And then we have other institutions that check into how the contracting are being done. So if all of these institutions do their job, contractors don't do subpar work for us and leave. So again, it brings us back to institutions. So the financing institution will have to be well positioned to understand what the money is being put to use And then other institutions, the regulatory institutions, and also the institutions that take care of the physical infrastructure, we all have to be well ready to handle all of these things. So take, for example, I currently work with a research group here in Brazil, and one of the main projects that has been done under the President Lula government here is the My House, My Life housing provision for the people in the country. So there is a huge housing deficit, and urban social movement, as we call them, they are a coalition of disadvantaged people. So they use popular education. So they call it the pedagogy of oppressed. So they try as much as possible to explain to themselves how they can champion their needs and all. So when the government was constructing the houses, they were well informed, they were part of it, they understood everything that was being done. And then after the project was done, the government had to give a part of the project monitoring to these youth, to these oppressed group. They call them social movements. So contractors, real estate developers, the financier of the project, which is the National Bank of Brazil, they call them the Econômica. So every one of them, they had to sit down in a room. They had to understand the need of each and every one of them. So this brings us back to our main topic, which is public participation. So when everybody that needs to be catered for in a project, irrespective of who they are, their social class, their level of ability to comprehend anything, or even their physical ability to be part of, everybody has to be part of this. So when all of these things are being put into place, so this project has been criticized so many times, but then it has lived for more than 15 years already. So the first part of the project started in 2009, and now we are currently in 2015, and they are still currently evaluating it for future purposes. And if, when visited, some of these buildings that were constructed in those years, they are still very well and sound. Structurally and mechanically, you could see this. When I was in the university, Obafemi Awolowo University in Ile-Ife, Ted Fund constructed a building for us. They call it the 1,000 seater. So we were in 200 level when the building was constructed. Before I got to my year 5, which is 500 level, of course, there were so many strikes and all. So that was in the space of 3 to 4 years. There was a wind that happened in Ile-Ife the other day, and the building, the roof went off. Most of the seats were not well functioning before we even left the university. So these are the issues. So the contractor was nowhere to be found. Nobody could hold anybody accountable. And then the government institutions, the regulatory authority that needed to do all of these things, they were not there to be found. So you have to understand that when participation is done, you have to do it deliberately. So the deliberate attempt of the government here in Brazil to bring everybody on board, so it was owned. So the social movement had to own it because their members were benefiting from it. So they have other communities too, the LGBTQ community here. So they had to own it because they were excluded from some project over time, but the government had to bring them on board. So all of these things are what really help us at the end of the day to now have a project that is sustainable for the future. So we have to be deliberate with our attempt to create it. So it's not just having to come up with all these sustainable development rhetorics that we see everywhere now. We see we are building a sustainable building, and then we greenwash. So there is something they call greenwashing now. So you greenwash the project by saying we are putting facade. You see facade outside the building and say this building is going to be sustainable because there is green leaves outside or something. No. So structurally, physically, socially, you have to attend to the need of everybody that this project addressed to be able to make sure that in the next 5 to 15, in the next 10 to 15 years, or even 20 years, you still find this project there. And this is what we call sustainable development.
Thank you very much, Biola. I think of the concept of walkable cities, right? Because one of the things, and why I think of that is because I want to start taking walks, but I cannot do that because my street is not walkable. And that is one of the way I think about like infrastructure for me as a citizen, right? Because there's a lot of advice on and just based on what you're saying, like disadvantaged people and all that, there's a lot of advice on you taking care of your health or take more walks. And if I work remotely, I want to walk in the evening, but I can't do that because my street is actually not walkable. Do you get? So it's one of the ways I think about what you're saying now. How sustainable is the fact that, oh, the government has done the road on my street, but I cannot even walk on it, right? Is just somehow and all that, and just even roads. I cannot say you want to take long walks just as citizens. It actually amuses me a lot and makes me wonder how better we can make our cities sustainable, especially in a state like Lagos. We have houses jam-packed, the urban planning is quite bad, and there are just so many things that you do not get, like as a citizen, you cannot, there is no, like you said, just facade of leaves and, oh, you plant a tree or green carpet grass.
Yeah.
Yeah, just facade of those things that do not exist. And also this affects like climate too, longer, because that's something I wanted to point out, that it affects climate. We do not have greeneries around. Trees are being cut down to build houses. Houses are packed together just in terms of how the urban planning, and there's the town planning organization. There are all these regulatory bodies, but still things are not still being done like in the proper way. So thank you for sharing that. And I would like to ask Dolapo this question next. And the question is basically on how can we ensure that the um based on accessibility and inclusivity for citizens, how can we ensure that we can hold government accountable to making infrastructure accessible and inclusive, right? Because like you've shared that the Igbo Shere High Court that was very, very was built in that in a way that you would have really loved, and now it has been destroyed. We don't even know if what they are building there now is going to be very accessible, because they would want to, like, you really cannot tell if it's going to be accessible. And another thing that I've even noticed is sometimes they just do these things as, oh, this is what is going on now, let us just put a ramp in this place. They don't know why they are putting a ramp or something, or which wheelchair accessible. Very funny thing, the bus station at Oshodi has a wheelchair and the door is always locked. And I find it actually very funny because these are the kind of things I tend to notice when I use public facilities, right? There's a bus station, you said it's wheelchair accessible, there's a ramp, but the door is locked. That means people cannot use it, right? So I'm trying, how do we hold government accountable to accessibility and inclusivity features in the terms of infrastructure that they build for citizens?
So thank you so much. And I shake my head, I laugh, and inside me I cry. How I wish there was consequence for when standards are not kept. Because if you should go and check in our standard organizations of Nigeria, in the building code, in so many things, the right thing to be done exists. But do we do them? And when it's not done, how do you hold people accountable? Provisions are made, like that locked door that you referred to, for that is supposed to be the access point of a wheelchair user. But somewhere in the subconscious of citizens like you and I, they do not think a wheelchair user, why should they come out? Maybe you should be locked in your house. You should not even bother to use or access public spaces. And this speaks to a mindset. It speaks to a mindset. It speaks to the mindset who expects that anyone with any sort of impairment should not, or is not expected to, want to do everything people who do not have impairments do. So even while there could be fantastic designs, great strategy, at least somebody must have made sure that provision was made. That's why it's even there in the first place, even though the current management of that location have locked it. We can only continue to spotlight what is not going well. And for everywhere we see proper inclusive spaces where staff of that location are well trained, you know, we need to also highlight those stories as a good example of something that is working, something that has been designed for general universal use, that is accessible and safe. That safety factor is really, really important, because you might find some things are provisioned for our community, but if they should use it, it becomes, it could even put them at further risk with their impairment. So because it's not safe, nobody bothers to come through there, and it remains there as an edifice of a tick box. That footbridge that you mentioned, that it's difficult for even a person without an impairment to use, to even come to the base of the footbridge. I mean, it's a step, so you can, like, how did someone not look at the use case? And which is why having citizens test what is built. I really, I was liking the story Biola was talking about, what they did in Brazil. Yeah, many people might not understand why that stakeholder management was really, really important. But really, in the end, if you want us to safely use these things that are being provisioned by governments, is that taxpayers' money, it's something we want to last for long. We need to test them. From the design point, we need to make sure everything is catered for. From the final build, we need to test them that is working well. It's always important when, especially mass housing or schooling areas, and which is why I personally am very excited about the potential change we should see with the local government area empowerment. In every space, can there be pilots first? So that when you test the pilots, the learnings from the pilots can now be implemented to make sure whatever mistakes are made in the pilot location are not replicated, and then, of course, the pilots can be retrofitted or it could be corrected. You know, you are spending less that way. And there absolutely needs to be consequence. In our country, even when things are not done the right way, yes, we talk about it, we point at it, but is there a real consequence? And then is there a final correction that makes it usable in the end? We're not seeing that. And I hope you would permit me to add yet, YET, because again, I come back to, we need to speak up. Persons who are using these facilities need to continue to highlight why it's not working for us. And when the local government areas really kick in, especially because that's the spaces where we as citizens we use all the time. I really hope, and I'm fingers crossed that it's closer to hold, the accountability will be better, because now the governance that will make spaces safe for everyone's use is closer. So fingers crossed that we should see a change. On our side, from the disability community, we're already engaging very loudly about the systems that don't work, inclusive schools that are not accessible, advocating for where there are walkways that it should be clear and safe for everyone to move through. And when we're coming through, could our fellow citizens please make space, make way, give us quick access so that we can also pass? There needs to be a lot more awareness that persons, citizens with disabilities, with different impairments, we are also productive members of society. You might not see us every day, we might be walking online, but we're productive too, and we want to interact with our spaces too. So fingers crossed that local government areas, and then more citizen participation, and then consequences, then also spotlighting what's working well. I'm really hoping that this mix in the near future will begin to move us to infrastructure that works for us on all levels, whether it is housing or power or internet or just safe common areas for communal use.
Thank you very much. I totally agree with you. I totally agree with the fact that just to add, citizens need to also be educated about these things, one. And two, as much as citizens need to be educated, even public officials need to be educated about these things. because even in public offices, in offices that belong to government, we need to see that these things are implemented, right? And we can then, what happens in our houses, in our homes, except of course we want to say that, we don't want to have anything to do with persons with disabilities, and which will actually be which will not be
Discriminatory.
inclusive at all. Yes, it will be demeaning in the sense. So we need to understand that, and not just one kind of disability, like the different disabilities that exist and what actually works for them. And is something that is actually dear to my heart, because I try to want to, like you said, make way for persons with disabilities when they want to pass, and give them just that benefit, even if it's going to delay what I have to do. Because it happens that a lot of us, we do not understand how it is, because we are talking about infrastructure like this. There's also the problem of finance for them. They have like just these plenty problems that we cannot, so we can only do our best, try to understand their disabilities, try to learn how we can help, and try to see what we can do when it is it is actually very needed, very, very needed. We cannot just say that we would not. So I'm just going to be asking us for final words now. And I want the final words to come in. What's one thing that we can do, like as citizens, right, to help in infrastructure development? And I would like Abiola to go first. Then Dolapo will tell us in terms of for speaking for PWDs. Thank you.
Okay. All right. It's been a great time to share with everyone here. So for me, one thing, which is why I would like to also commend you guys, Busola, Victoria, and your whole team for the work you guys are currently doing and what you will be doing with SeraNova as well. It has similar traits with the pedagogy of the oppressed. Like I said, the popular education that is being used in Brazil to train the underserved and disadvantaged people to understand their rights in an unjust society. So it's just more like on making people to understand what needs to be done on issues around infrastructure, starting from the agenda setting, how they can play a good role in the pre-decision stage, to the policy formulation, to also the policy implementation and the coordination. So as we all know, like the policy process is one process that it doesn't work separately. Everything works together. So it's this main idea of the garbage can, everything goes together. So we have to make sure that this learning process is mainstream, and mainstream in the sense that it doesn't stop on the website, on the platform. It also being used, being decentered in a way, and also being disseminated to people that don't seem to have access to all of these things. So by having to also making sure that citizens are able to understand in layman's time. So most of these things that we say online are very, very vital. They are very, very important. But then when we put them in the language that many people understand, it's always very, very nice, and it's achieved their goal. And this is one of the things that the Slum and Shack Dwellers Association in Kenya, in South Africa, in Uganda, and in Sierra Leone are currently doing. So which is what they are trying to engage, bring people who are part of the community they are trying to serve, to also give them data about their community, teach them more about their community. And these people are the ones that now speak up for themselves, and not the organizations that are working with them. So they put them at the forefront. So these are ways that we can actually achieve an inclusive outcome, and also we can get citizens to participate effectively in policy process and policy formulation. Because as we all know, most of our policies, their outcomes are already foregone. The government already know what they want to achieve. So how do we now initiate a process that alter this foregone outcome and make sure that new ideas are being put into place. So these are very, very important. And seeing young people bringing innovative ideas that are very, very timely, because we have a knowledge deficit issue presently in Nigeria now. As Sheoni Bide, the founder of Budget, once said in one of the conversations we were opportune to have with him, he said citizens are too poor to understand their democratic rights in Nigeria. So, like the first culture shock I had when I went to an European country was trying to help a blind person to cross. So I was really ashamed of myself at that point because I didn't know this person had to, not even the person, the way people around me were looking at me like, what are you trying to do? So tactiles were there. He had to press the traffic lights, and it was making a kind of sound that I never knew it was for him to cross. So these are the inclusivity that we are talking about. So by the time it was green light, he knew it was green light and he could cross over. And then the tactiles were there for him. He was taking bus all alone. So this is why they said don't call people this. The words, the representations are also very, very important, which is people living with disability. So it's not like it's something we all want to be. No, it's just come as it is, and we have to embrace it. We have to see the brighter side of it. And when, as government, they are being put to address the need of every one of us, I think we'll be able to achieve our goal. So, which is why I said these things need to be simplified. Its access to it need to be democratized to people on these underserved communities that we are talking about, and we need to see that we need to find a way to increase government receptivity to infrastructure projects that are more inclusive in Nigeria. It's a big problem, it's a big issue, but we can, a drop in the ocean, we can keep dropping until it becomes full. So it's a marathon, like my friend we always say, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So the effort that the team is putting, the platforms and everything, we need to make sure that people need to understand and learn more, and then it gets to the deeper communities that need to understand all of these things. So thank you very much, and really appreciate the platforms you giving me to share these insights with you also.
Thank you very much, Abiola. So, Delako, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I smile because, yes, we persons with disabilities, we like to be as independent as possible. And I really look forward to the day where independent living, from home to school to work to everywhere we want to go, to the mall, to the movies, to across all different impairment types, we can be as independent as possible, as what Biola experienced. What I want us to have in mind is great work being done with SeraNova. Let's make sure it is accessible for all users, meaning a blind person with a screen reader can go there and get information. Could we also embed some information around making it convenient and easier and universal for different impairment types? So yes, there's some impairments that people have from when they're young, but again, even as all of us pray for this ripe old age, impairments happen as we get older, and no matter what age, that evening stroll, the safely back and forth spaces that you're familiar with, whether it's for a young person or a middle-aged person or a more mature person, is a gift to us all. So accessible spaces, things that are built in the name of accessibility and they are not working, they are not fit for use. Can we continue to call them out? And can contractors who have built that, can they be held accountable to make the fixes that are required for taxpayers' money to put in the right structures that can be used by all. In designing things, use the universal design codes so that with or without impairment, you would make sure you are catering to the maximum rather than to a select few. Yes, we need to be better informed. We need to understand that even as we make our choices, for example, in my community, when we want to have events, there's some places we prefer to go because it's set up to cater to our needs, and other spaces who are not accessible, they are losing money, and you see them quickly making the adaptations because they do not want to lose that business. So again, there is the business case, there is the use case, there's also the sustainability cases to make sure that every space is universally accessible to all persons with or without disability. Plan for everybody. Test that everyone can safely use. One part, restrooms. Oh my goodness. We need to make sure restrooms are accessible beyond just getting in and getting out. Whatever we need to do in the spaces must be done with dignity and safely. I'm really hoping, like I said, that as we see um, um, structures like the political structures strengthening from the local government up, I'm really hoping that the accountabilities that need to happen be happening more vocally. We need to better inform. We need to be part of the process. Everyone should participate. You do not need to have a disability to hold space and make sure that things that are being done, infrastructure that are being put in place is accessible to all. Let us all be our brother's keeper as citizens.
Thank you very much, Dolapo. Thank you for sharing those insights. Thank you, Abiola. And thank you everyone for listening through this conversation. I personally learned a lot. And when SeraNova is launched next week, please engage in the platform. A lot of work has gone into it. Recommend the platform for every stakeholder that you think would need it. Like, I don't think there's going to be any stakeholder that doesn't need it. Policy, people in government, everybody, they would need the platform in whatever form that we are going to use it. And thank you, Busolami, for this opportunity to moderate this session. Thank you to the Infra Spotlight team, and see you next time. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've come to the very end of this program. I would just really like to say a very big thank you. A very big thank you to Dr. Tayo from the NESG. He's no longer here now, but to communicate that we are indeed grateful for the insights that he shared in his keynote address. I also want to thank Abiola, Dolapo Ma'am, and Victoria, because the three of you and so many people on this call work in the civic space. The work that you do is pushing forward advocacy in different areas. And so it's really a privilege to have you here to share out of your wealth of knowledge with us. And I also really want to thank Oluwatobi Aigbogun, who is representing the Board of Trustees of Infra Spotlight. Thank you so much for everything that you do to ensure that we are building structures, that we are growing, and we are doing the right things per time. And I also want to thank everyone who's joined here, the majority population here, the young people. And I don't want to sound very cliche, but as a young person myself, I think that there is so much that we do every day. There is so much that we do in the different work that we do, whether as an entrepreneur or as an activist or as a student, so much that we all do in our respective spaces. So I really thank everyone here for everything that you do in your respective spaces and how you are pushing the narrative for a better Nigeria. I just want to also communicate that I will take on board the recommendation that Dolapo has provided. Our goal and our hope is that SeraNova is accessible to all. We are already testing, and also we've started to discuss what the future of that platform will be so that it's accessible for people with disability across various spectrums of that, but also that it's not just for the literate. We're looking to ensure that the information is translated to indigenous local languages. And so that's the future for us, that we continue to grow so people have the information they can leverage to hold their government accountable. It will be impossible for me to close without saying a very big thank you to the Infra Spotlight team. I saw Riwan join us earlier. I'm not sure if Riwan is still on the call, but also Towoju, thank you very much for the work that you do. And thank you to all of our participants. I would like for, if Towoju can please share our social media handle, please follow us on social media. After this event, as we've said, we are launching SeraNova officially next week, just a week from now on Friday, the 31st of January. After the launch, we plan to hold various trainings and focus group discussions with different stakeholders, from journalists to students to advocates to even local governments. We're hoping that we can have physical meetings with local governments to, like, talk about this and to train them how to use the platform, to train them how to contribute to infrastructure policy making with youth groups. So please look out for the event, the post-launch trainings, workshops, or focus group discussions we'll be having with each stakeholder so we can better understand their need. We can also be able to gather their needs to also push for more advocacy, but also train them on how they can use the platform, how they can contribute to the next phase of this platform to make it what it's supposed to be. So we kindly ask that you follow us on social media, and we also ask that you keep an eye out for the different things we'll be doing, from programs to our publications on our website, and also to our project. SeraNova was our first project in partnership with Learn Politics. So I will close by saying a very big thank you to Learn Politics. Victoria here is the founder of Learn Politics. Thank you for being a worthy partner and bringing so much value to ensuring that SeraNova can go live. And so have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very, very much for joining. Have a good afternoon.